can be a very empowering thing to kind of recognize that in yourself that something isn't quite right. It's a bumpy road to sometimes have that addressed, right? So, um, yeah, I've heard lots of unfortunate stories, but that's like what Kelsey said. What we're here for as dietitians, you can have a chat with us at any time through that 15-minute call, just to get some guidance as to what the next steps are. We're always welcoming you with open arms and figuring out, okay, what maybe do we need to focus on? Are there any red flags going on? And also just validating your symptoms because that can go very unvalidated, unfortunately, sometimes in other areas that you might visit. So just, yeah, acknowledging that you know your body best. If something's not feeling right, then there's always things that we can work on in nutrition and lifestyle to help you out there. And so, yeah, we're always there for you for that.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of A Plate Full of Insights. Today, I am joined by Laura and Kelsey, two of our dietitians that focus in the area of gut health. And today, we'll be talking about different health issues related to gut health and their approaches to helping clients working through these issues. So, Kelsey, it's been a while since you've been on. So, why don't you introduce yourself to those who are listening?
Thank you for having me, Matthew and Laura. You guys are two of my favorite people, so I'm just really excited to spend some time with you. So I'm a registered dietitian. I've been with Revive Wellness for about 14 years now, and with that 14 years has come a lot of just experience and learning and growing as a dietitian and learning better ways to kind of help support my clients moving forward.
Yes. And Laura and I have been on quite a few times, so no intro needed there. So, where we can start is just with more of an introduction to gut health and the common types of issues that you both see when working with clients in this area. Whoever wants to start can go first.
I can start. I mean, GI issues, there's so many, and it's so varied, and every person's experience is so different. And I think that's one of the things that I've really come to appreciate when I'm working with individuals living with GI issues is like it's very different. And so sometimes it's hard to always figure out what the exact cause is, but we're able to work together to help manage the symptoms, right? And help them have a better quality of life and more confidence in knowing, okay, these are the things that I need to do to feel like the best version of myself. And so when you're thinking about gut issues, you kind of have to remember that your digestive tract is 27 feet. That's a lot of room and opportunities for things to maybe not function as optimally. So that could be anything from like reflux or IBS, IBD, constipation, diarrhea. There can be lots of different things, even like hemorrhoids and fissures and diverticulosis. So there can be a lot of different GI issues with different pathophysiologies, and then also how that shows up in individuals is very unique and different to that person. Did I miss anything in there, Laura?
You're good. I'm trying to think of what else I would add to that, but if anything, yeah, like what I typically see people about is probably more the IBS um, sort of symptoms, if not an actual diagnosis of IBS. We're looking at, yeah, some diarrhea or constipation side of things. Just general like bloating is a very common one that I see people coming in for help with. And so those symptoms are things that we want to treat and manage. Sometimes it can be a matter of like getting to um, what is causing that for sure. But a lot of the times it is symptom management, like you said, Kelsey. So there are a couple of different aspects that we look at there. There are some red flags to be aware of. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that one. I know, Kelsey, you have one that you always talk to your clients about to make sure that we're seeing a doctor if they are experiencing that.
I think always if there's blood in the stool. That's generally a really good indication that you should go see your doctor right away, and have that investigated because it might be nothing, but it could also be a bigger problem. Other things that we kind of look for is if there's weight loss that's unintentional, or if you're having digestive issues along with a fever. Those are kind of good indications that you should be following up with your doctor. Things that can maybe indicate like following up with a dietitian, or things that are feeling off, is like if there's been a change in bowel routine, if you're starting to have bowel movements at night while you're sleeping. Those are things to explore. And again, I guess one last thing to add about like making sure to follow up with your doctor is if there has been a change and there's a family history of bowel disease. That again is always a really good opportunity to go have a conversation with your doctor, get it investigated, and then understand too that dietitians work alongside to help support you. And I think anytime digestion is involved, a dietitian should also be involved, right? Because I've had lots of clients that, newly diagnosed with Crohn's disease, went through the hospital program, but then came out with no idea of what to do now moving forward, right? So there's just so many different levels where a dietitian can help support people, both with diagnosis and without.
Yeah, I think it's very important to highlight the importance of that there is much that can be done, even if there is no diagnosis. There are different things that we can try, and that can help to either alleviate symptoms as we're waiting for further investigation. It may help to actually identify potential issues that are actually the cause as we're waiting. So, yeah, it is important to highlight the importance of that aspect. And another piece that you touched on there is after a diagnosis with a doctor, this applies to gut health issues and other issues. So people sometimes feel kind of like there's a relief that we know what's going on, but kind of another feeling of like, what do I do next? And that guidance doesn't always come following a diagnosis with a doctor, or it might be quite brief, or you might just be very distraught and distracted as they very briefly go over some of those initial stages.
Well, and it's helpful to kind of think too, like with GI issues, it evolves over time as well. And with like certain conditions, yes, there's very strict phases of that condition, like with IBD. If you're in an active flare up versus if you're in remission, your eating pattern can look different. And so working with a dietitian can be really helpful because, especially private practice, because our relationship can kind of evolve and change and support you with where you're needed. Right. And so I have lots of clients where when we first got together, they had a lot of really acute symptoms, like lots of bloating, lots of gas, lots of distension, or changes in their bowel routine that we were actively working on improving. And then eventually our sessions could get moved out. And then we started, how can we take what we've learned and what works for you and apply it to now when I'm traveling? Or how do I apply it now that I'm feeding a toddler? Right. So that's where it's a really unique opportunity. And I always view it as such a huge privilege to be able to work with people in this capacity. Is our relationship gets to grow to help support the individual with where they're at in their current life stage.
Yeah, my favorite thing about working with people living with, I mean, any type of gut issue, just in general, this always happens as well. But um, a lot of the times, I think people come in thinking that they get this diagnosis or they're having their symptoms, so they must need to restrict a bunch of food groups, or they're obviously eating something that they're intolerant to or have some sort of sensitivity to. And so they're going to a dietitian. It makes sense. They're going to a dietitian to know, okay, what do I need to get rid of and restrict so I don't get these symptoms? And my favorite part is kind of demystifying that it's not necessarily about restriction. Our end goal is usually to kind of expand on the diet and make it so that you are able to enjoy as many foods and variety of foods as possible without those symptoms. So there's always a time and place for things like elimination diets that can be quite a standard that we go for with certain conditions. That's eliminating certain potential trigger foods or things that might exacerbate symptoms. But these are very notably supposed to be for a short period of time so that we can see if we get a resolution in symptoms. In some cases, we're reintroducing in a very systematic way so that we can see how much can we expand on the diet, how much can we make this fit into your lifestyle, and consider all of that personalized as well. Um, so yeah, just like to mention that if you're coming in with a diagnosis, some gut issues, um, please don't fear that you need to restrict everything for the rest of your life. There's hope out there. It's something that like I know Kelsey, you're probably very passionate about this as well. I know you are. But just expanding on the diet as much as possible and keeping food an enjoyable process that can fit into your lifestyle.
Yeah, those are such good points, Laura. And it always kind of makes me come to mind. Like, I see a lot of clients that are newly diagnosed with IBS, and now they have this idea that they need to follow a low FODMAP diet. And I totally get it. Like with a lot of GI doctors or even family doctors, they want to give people something tangible to start with. Like, oh, just do this. It's shown in research that it can improve symptoms. But from my experience, at least, I have a lot of clients that come in on the low FODMAP diet and it hasn't been improving their symptoms. And part of that is because we haven't addressed like the bigger players, right? We may not have a good eating rhythm, or we may not have good balance to our meals that can help to optimize gut function, right? And help minimize some of those symptoms. Or we might not be chewing our food really well, or we might be eating really fast, or when we're eating, we might not be sitting at like a 90-90 position. So I love that you brought out about like the elimination diets, because often we want to start there. And when I was a newer dietitian, I always wanted to start with the elimination because it felt like actionable. Like, I've got a plan, we can do this. But now I'm finding really checking in with those basics, getting to know like their rhythm of their day, their lifestyle, what their meal composition looks like, what foods they love, how they enjoy it, how they like to enjoy their foods. All of these things are so important to look at first sometimes before moving right away to that elimination diet.
Yeah, that's very important when it comes to trying to make it a more impactful type of work that you're doing together, but also the aspect of making it less of a stressful and essentially difficult situation where people will feel like what is left for me to even be able to eat. But moving more towards, like you said, talking about those patterns, considering other factors that can be adding on top of things like stress and such that can make existing IBS symptoms worse. Yeah, that's a great approach for going to this, and something that people may not have in their mind when it comes to potentially seeing a dietitian for these issues. Because, like you said, if they're seeing a doctor first, they might be given more of that general type of handout that is very broad and expansive in what needs to be taken out. But then there are no next steps about reintroduction. There are no steps before that about things you mentioned about like the meal pattern and examining the context around it. So it's very important.
If there's anything that will make gut issues worse, it's piling on the stress with the diagnosis and not enough context or follow up. So yeah, absolutely, that's a huge part, and why that's kind of part of our philosophy at Revive is focusing on overall lifestyle, focusing on sleep and stress management and mental health and all of those other things that can impact your nutrition and your digestion. Because yeah, it's not all just one faceted thing. There's going to be definitely the gut and the brain connection that can impact any, even things like IBD rather than just IBS as well. That can make your digestion just go a little bit chaotic and haywire for sure.
Yeah, focusing on just being more comfortable with food and eating in itself can go a long way, sometimes further than taking out certain foods. And that's another big piece, yeah, that we try to work on there.
Well, and I think it adds to that conversation too of like sometimes when we are trying to figure things out, we start to do too much, right? And we start taking, following the meal plan, taking all the supplements, trying to sleep, trying to exercise, trying to do everything that we subconsciously know is good for our health. But like Laura said, it can make it a lot more chaotic. And so that's where it's really helpful to be able to have like a very a plan in place and a very systematic approach of like, okay, we're going to try this and then see how you respond. And we slowly just keep adding. And with that, like, it's so incredible to see the individual you're working with, just their confidence grows. In my first couple sessions, I might be doing a lot of the talking, but then eventually it shifts to where they're leading the session, they're talking. There's this really beautiful piece of empowerment that comes where they fully understand how their stress impacts them, how their sleep impacts them, how their nutrition impacts them. And with that too, sometimes that can be a lot. So I always like to bring it down to like, okay, what are our bare minimums? Like if we've only got this much time, what are those pieces that we need to focus on that have the biggest impact?
And another really big benefit there of that more simple, slow, one thing at a time type of approach is it's easier to see what's actually helping if we're just testing out one change at a time rather than trying to do everything at once. It's harder to actually do and it's harder to actually see what's the most beneficial there.
Yeah, I feel like it's a lot in kind of that first initial assessment that you get with a client because they are coming in with all of these potential interventions that they've heard maybe from their doctor, maybe from naturopathic clinic and things like that. Or even just their friends and general advice on the internet. There's a lot out there in terms of gut health right now. So it really is just focusing in that session. Like, can we get an idea of what your life is looking right now? Are we doing many, many things at once that maybe we can hone in on one of those things that perhaps sounds like it might be the most successful for you? Like Kelsey always says, just focusing on that balance, getting in that rest and digest state rather than being kind of like haywired and stressed out all the time. That's going to be the biggest thing that we need to make sure that we cover first. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of things to consider and we're there to make it simpler, I guess if I had to summarize our role for sure.
Yeah, we kind of like clear out the noise, right? And really help to empower it. Cause like, I don't know if you're feeling this, Laura, but I feel like there's so much over information. Like, and it just feels like so accessible, but then it's also very conflicting sometimes. So I always like to like create a safe space to be able to ask these questions and then have like a meaningful conversation of, does this make sense to the individual I'm working with in their life? Right. And what does that look like? Because, like you said, especially with social media, there's so much push right now on gut health, um, that I'm always kind of curious, like with the terminology. I was like, what does that actually mean? Like when you say I'm supporting my gut, okay, like what does that mean? Because you're trying to sell me something. So how is this product going to support my gut better than, maybe some of these other factors that we talked about before, right? Um, but I think like it brings up such a good point too, Laura, why we had to create a separate package for people who are experiencing GI issues. Because I know like we were trying, often I find like if we go session to session with clients, there's not as much time in between sessions for support, or there's not as much time to pull together some really specific and individualized recommendations for the person that I'm working with, right? And so we tried creating an individualized gut package, which gives us more time together in the initial assessment, so we're not rushing through this because, like you said, it's so complex and there's so many factors. And the other thing I realized too is like people coming in with GI issues, it's not like they woke up yesterday and had it. Like they've been dealing with this for sometimes years and they felt like they've been passed around the medical system. So part of the reason of having a longer fall like initial assessment is to make sure that they feel heard and valued and that I'm getting an understanding of what they've gone through and what they've tried and what's worked and what hasn't worked, right? And then we also within that package have a little bit more time to prepare specific recommendations if we need to put it into a very like in a meal plan, for example, because maybe they are at the stage where we do need to start with an elimination diet because they've done X, Y, and Z already. um, or it gives us more like opportunity to do work outside of our sessions, checking in regularly in our chat, or I love to be able to review the journals because the way that we do it, they're able to kind of journal their food, reflect on their symptoms, track their bowel movements, and then I can come in and ask thought questions or clarify information and say, okay, given this, let's try this for the next 3 days, and I'll check back in, right? And so that's where, um, just that addition of time and opportunity to make it really specific and impactful for that person allows us to be more successful.
Yeah, something so complex, yeah, needs to be very individualized and have that additional time. Unlike some of the online conflicting stuff that is often, yeah, oversimplified or says that everyone needs to do the exact same thing. We truly need to take the time to understand each individual person and what they've already done, what already seems to be helping versus hurting. Not everyone's going to be the same. It's not a algorithmic thing or a list of top 10 foods to avoid or whatever the latest trend is that week that's spreading around. It's much more individualized than that.
Well, and like a good example of this is fiber. And I'm really excited. I feel like fiber is about to have its moment in social media, making me so excited.
Yay.
We
But
did a good one finally,
yeah,
kind of.
yes, yes. But with that, so now if fiber is gaining popularity, for example, there's going to be the promotion of eat more fiber. Well, for some people with GI issues, that's great. For other people, that's terrible, and that might not work out so well for them. And so for a lot of people, it's also finding, okay, how much fiber do I need to be eating? What type of fiber do I need to be eating? Because some can make certain symptoms worse, some can make certain symptoms better. And then also be aware that anytime there is that like increase um, in focus, there's now going to be a lot more products and selling. So we'll probably start seeing more fiber supplements being pushed. But then with fiber supplements, we have to be careful. We need to pick the ones that can help support the symptomology, right? Because I see a lot of fiber supplements that are just like a ton of one type of fiber, and maybe it's more of like a prebiotic fiber like inulin or chicory root, which is going to create a lot more gas or distension or bloating for some individuals. And so that could actually make things worse, right? Or it also plays into like some of these foods with like lower net carbs because they've put in a bunch of fiber, typically one type, and then we start to see more GI symptoms because of that, right? Because like when you think about supporting our gut, one of the things that we do know is that diversity is really important. And so anything that isn't digested in our upper GI tract gets digested in our colon, right? And we want that. That's why like the different types of fiber are so important, because those are a type of prebiotic which help to feed that colon or feed that bacterium in the colon. And then the products that they produce or the postbiotics, that's where we get the benefit from, of like the reduced inflammation or the or hormone productions and metabolism, right? So it's really important that we're focusing on variety and not just one type of fiber. And that's where sometimes I always like to be cautious of like when it's having its moment, we need to be mindful of, do we actually need the supplements that are going to follow in that as well?
Yeah, like this is one internet trend where it starts with a big grain of truth. Like the average American, and I believe similarly average Canadian, gets about 14 grams of fiber a day, which on average is inadequate and on average should be higher. But we need to be a lot more specific in the types of fiber for each individual and why it's beneficial. And does that apply to this particular person? Maybe you're already eating a lot, spreading it out and not getting like those. I have a brand in mind that you're probably familiar with, Kelsey, as well, where like the net carbs and then the like extra 20 grams of fiber are not going to be good for some people. And for many people, eating that all at once is not going to be a fun day.
Yeah, I think the big thing to mention too is if you are wanting to include more fiber in your diet, we'll all be the first people to say, "Oh my God, that's amazing! Please do." Yes, probably benefit from that, but please do it gradually, especially if you're visiting the idea of a supplement that's a very specific type of fiber. That's the perfect time for you to check in with one of us, see if there's certain recommendations for gradually increasing that or the certain type of fiber like you said, Kelsey. Some of those types of soluble fiber, which can hold on to water and kind of soften the stool, but also creates a little bit of a gelling effect, I guess, in the digestive tract. If we're increasing that really, really quickly, then it can create a too much of a gel in our digestive system. So it could be swinging you on the other direction of what you're wanting to achieve. If you're wanting to have better, softer bowel movements, block it up too much, you're not going to be having a bowel movement. So it just takes a little bit of extra care, and not doing that kind of all or nothing mindset, which can be so common when we see these like amazing benefits on the internet from fiber right now. It's getting its time in the spotlight. But there's always that nuance. There's always the sort of happy medium that we need to find there if we're truly going to get something that's successful long term.
Yeah, and I always love that you bring that up, Laura. You know, you do such a good job of always bringing it back to like the practicality of it. And you're right, like we don't want to increase the fiber too rapidly. And so typically, if you're wanting to work on it, start with just one meal or one snack. Think about adding a little bit more fiber to that one meal or snack. So, for example, maybe you're somebody that does err on maybe looser bowel movements. So maybe we do lean into more of the soluble fiber, like you were saying, Laura. And so maybe we start with, okay, let's try having a balanced breakfast with oatmeal present, right? Because oatmeal is really high in soluble fiber. So then let's try that for a couple days and see how I feel. How does my bowel movements respond? Right? Or maybe if you're somebody that loves having like a nice big delicious salad at lunchtime, maybe we experiment with adding some beans to that salad to see, do I feel more full? Do I feel more satisfied? Right? And I think that's the neat thing about fibers. There's so many different types because it's found in like our beans, our lentils, legumes, nuts, seeds, vegetables, fruit. And really, you just think about like, or in whole grains, of course, as well. But when you think about all the different color possibilities there, like I really, in my mind, color translates to variety, right? And so for some individuals who maybe just have some GI symptoms where things just feel out of balance, like maybe I'm just not having as regular bowel movements, or maybe I'm experiencing a little bit more, or I'm wanting to experience a little bit more variety or better energy levels, or I want to have more consistent bowel movements. That might be a really great place to start is, okay, how can I improve this one meal? Right? Versus if you maybe have more complex issues, I would maybe encourage to allow somebody to like reach out to a registered dietitian and allow us to walk that journey with you to really figure out, okay, what is that balance? What do I need to have? You know, I have one client comes to mind and she has two different GI issues going on. She has IBS, and then she also has I think it's collagen colitis, or it's a type of colitis. But the recommendations are low fiber for the colitis and then high fiber for IBS. So finding that middle ground of like, what's that sweet spot to help them feel like the best version of themselves.
Yeah, that's where the personalization comes in. We have all the information available to us for those two separate conditions, but what do we have to actually do to get this one person feeling better, right? So, yeah, it's really cool.
The only generalized thing we'll probably say today is don't eat those like 30-gram fiber bagels all at once when you're trying to increase your fiber. That is too much too quickly. Like we said, gradual is where we want to go there. And also increasing water as we are increasing fiber can be helpful too.
I find water is very slept on. Like I think water had its moment a couple years ago. There was a 1 gallon water challenge going on when I was in school a couple of years ago, and so I thought we were kind of maybe veering too far on one end actually, but we're getting more fluids in. But now that I actually find as I'm taking in clients, that's kind of one of those basic things that we want to cover first is how much fluid are you getting in a day? And oftentimes it's the response that I get is, oh, I don't drink water. I'm like, okay, let's focus on that because if we're going to add any of that soluble fiber that holds on to water, we do need the water to go along with it to get the beneficial effect. So um, good tip there, Matthew. Focus on the water for sure. That's a big part of gut health, even if you don't have any necessarily like diagnosed gut issues, or you don't feel like you're necessarily struggling with anything in particular. That's just one of kind of your basic things that you can do to maintain your digestive health and things kind of moving through you nicely.
Yeah, and I mean, it's always a good indicator too to take a look in the toilet, right? Like your urine should be a nice pale yellow color, right? If it's darker, then that might lead to more like constipation, right? So that's, and also again, like looking in the toilet for your bowel movements too. We often use like the Bristol stool chart where it's got different phases, but ideally you want to have like a nice, soft, smooth, easy to pass bowel movement. If you're kind of on either end of that, then it might be worth a conversation.
Something to discuss next that people might find helpful, I think, would be just going a little more into the different types of gut health issues. I know we touched on IBS a bit more than some of the others, but what are some other common gut health issues that dietitians can work with people on?
I can start with that. So, in my practice, I see quite a few people with reflux. So, that's basically when you have contents of the stomach reflecting up into the esophagus and create like a burning sensation. And then I also see a lot of people with IBS, and typically that's classified using like the Rome 4 criteria, where there's reoccurrent abdominal pain at least 1 day per week over 3 months. Symptoms have been going on for at least 6 months, and that there's about a change in bowel routine, so either a change in frequency or consistency. And then we also see quite a bit of IBD, and so that could either be Crohn's disease, which can affect any part of the digestive tract, or ulcerative colitis, which affects mostly just the colon and the rectum. And then we also see quite a bit of food sensitivities. So these are either people have identified um, that they're sensitive to certain types of foods, or they're wanting to explore if they are, because again, their digestion just doesn't, something along the process of digestion just doesn't feel like it used to, or doesn't feel like they feel it should. And so we might explore food sensitivities. And these are a little bit different than like a food allergy where you get an anaphylactic reaction to what you're eating. A food sensitivity can be anywhere from like potentially right away up to like 48 hours later, because it can elicit an immune response. So those ones can always be a little bit more tricky to navigate. Um, and then I'll let Laura kind of take over some of the other things that she sees, because she's more of an expert in that area and has more experience with SIBO and stuff like that.
Well, I don't know if I have more experience or expertise in anything with you, Kelsey, but sure, I'll give it a go. But yeah, I do see a lot of people with IBS. The food sensitivities is always kind of a something that shows up when somebody books with me, that they've either had testing for food sensitivities, or like you said, Kelsey, something just is not feeling right, or they've noticed some symptoms that they can sort of link to certain types of foods, or just wanting to investigate further. Um, the testing is the one thing that I think will segue into another topic we wanted to cover on today, but that's a big area that I work in. The other one that can pop up is SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So that's kind of what Kelsey had mentioned before, is some of those gut bacteria that are normally in our large colon and very beneficial to be there, giving off those postbiotics that are good for overall health and chronic disease prevention, all of this good stuff. Sometimes that can gravitate for whatever reason into the small intestine. That's what it's called, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And that can cause some very upsetting symptoms. They can be very similar to irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS. So that can lead to a lot of confusion between the two. And so there are some tests out there to assess if there is SIBO present. Again, there are a lot of pros and cons and ups and downs to some of these tests around assessing your gut health or any gut issues that we do need to be aware of. But really, getting that diagnosis, if it's something that's established, can really help guide us in terms of what the treatment is, right? Sometimes, whether we take the test or not, it may not change our recommendations. Like you say, Kelsey, like we really want to focus on covering those bases of just general balanced eating, get ourselves in the rest and digest state, just to make sure our digestive system is working as best as it can. But yeah, sometimes those tests do significantly change our management recommendations, right? Because if there's something specifically going on there, in the case of SIBO, there might be the indication for asking your doctor about a course of antibiotics to remove that overgrowth. But other cases, sometimes those symptoms of SIBO, even though there's a diagnosis there, may not necessarily um, be the major cause of your symptoms. So some people may not really present um, as having those symptoms, even though it's there. So it's just pinpointing what actually the issue is there. So it can be very tricky. And maybe we can talk a little bit about those tests moving forward. I guess I segued into my own segue. I can talk about it. um, but yeah, I'll chat about it a bit. The one that I kind of touched on is the food sensitivity test. Um, the big one there that people come in, usually they already have it done when they're coming to see a dietitian, is the IgG testing. Um, and so I feel, I don't know why, Matthew, I feel like you know a lot about these, or you have a good explanation about these more than I do. Um, but essentially, these are tests that are supposed to be able to evaluate or figure out if you do have any food intolerances or sensitivities. Um, Unfortunately, they're not a validated test, or really looking at the right thing to determine if you are 100% like intolerant or sensitive to these types of foods. Um, and my understanding of it is the IgG sort of um, biomarker or whatever we're looking at there is basically just a recognition um, immunoglobulin. It's something that acknowledges that your body has been exposed to this type of food, not that you're sensitive or necessarily reacting in an adverse way to it. So a lot of the times I see people come in with these IgG tests that they're sensitive to eggs, milk, meat, dairy, wheat, gluten, all of that stuff. And they're like, oh my God, like, no wonder I feel bad. I eat all of those things every single day for every single meal. But that kind of checks out, because if it's just realizing that you are actually eating those things, is what that test is assessing, then it makes sense. But it's not necessarily um, what you are sensitive to. And so we just want to kind of get to the root of that. And in the end, the gold standard, if we're really wanting to find food sensitivities, is more of an elimination diet with a purposeful reintroduction sort of phase. So that's a big thing, part of that. But if anybody wants to add on, correct me if I got anything wrong.
No, I think you did a great job explaining it. And like one thing I always like to kind of make light of some testing and stuff like that. But I always kind of joke with my clients that if you ate a crayon, which we all did as children, I'm sure, and you tested like the blood markers or the antibodies for crayons, those would come up, right? So like you said, it's just showing that you have consumed these. And often when we see, oh, I eat these foods all the time and they're coming up high, it's because there's more of a presence of them, right? Like, so especially things like eggs, milk, or like dairy products or grains, those are typically foods we're eating multiple times a day, and maybe in different ways, because it might be in some baked goods or it might be the whole form. So that's where we typically see them elevated. But even if clients have had that and it's quite an investment to get it done, I still include it in our journey together, right? We can still do the elimination diet, including those factors. But then where it might differ is I want to be very strategic about the reintroduction phase, because I want to finish that phase with like the client having 100% absolute certainty that I'm either sensitive to this food or I'm not, right? And the other thing to like keep in mind too with those food sensitivities is it depends on other lifestyle factors, right? So if you imagine a bucket, and say we do have some food sensitivities, well, you can fill up your bucket and we may not experience symptoms until it starts overflowing, right? And then once we've hit kind of our limit for that, that's when we start to experience symptoms. And if we're stressed, our bucket gets smaller. If we've had less sleep this last week, our bucket gets smaller, right? So I always kind of found it interesting that when I was working with a lot of university students, totally fine with dairy, except during final exam week, right? We had to switch to dairy alternatives. And that part of that comes from that, again, learning and that empowerment piece of understanding your body. Because I always tell my clients, like, you are the expert on you. I'm just coming in with like an objective viewpoint to help bring my experience and say, okay, I'm observing this. Let's try this and see how you respond. right? And then if it works well, great, we add it to our little list of like, this works well for me. Doesn't work, then we add it to our list of like, doesn't really matter for me.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is important to note that with those tests, it's not that every single thing there is wrong. It just tends to significantly overshoot what may or may not be an issue and tends to cause a lot of yeah, these ones are quite upsetting to me because I do feel that they're often used in a predatory way where someone's very worried, very scared. They're like, I need to figure out what this is. They spend oftentimes hundreds of dollars, and then they feel that they have found like a very clear laid out answer, but it is more nuanced than that in terms of what is potentially truly a trigger there. So yeah, good points on the tests.
Yeah, and I think that kind of leads into I'm also starting to see like there's a big push into like better understanding our microbiome and like microbiome testing. And the reality is from my understanding, we are just not there yet, right? Like microbiome is so individually. So unless you are like literally doing a test at several spots during our 27 feet of digestive tract, it's just not going to be accurate. So like with where the research is right now, we're able to kind of test the stool coming out of individuals and then looking at what type of bacterium is within that stool. So one of the things we are seeing in research is like bifidobacterium. It tends to be less in individuals like with obesity or type 2 diabetes. And so individuals who maybe are less insulin resistant might have lower levels of that. Right. And so the application of that is really exciting. And I see that being more of like a pharmaceutical type support. I don't think somebody on TikTok or Instagram is going to have the answer for that. Or some of our influencers. But I think like that's where a lot of the research is. But we also have to remember, like, especially with the gut microbiome, that's a relatively newer area of research, and especially the level that we're starting to understand it is really new. Like we've always known, okay, it's good to have bacterium in our gut, but now starting to look at the different strains. And I think when I was looking into it, I think there's over, I don't even know how many different strains there is. Like there's like 40 trillion different bacterium in your culture or in your gut, and I can't even remember right now how many different strains there is. I feel like it's in the 100,000s.
Yeah, it's a lot. I don't know either. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's absolutely a lot. So then to try and tease out, okay, which ones do we need to support? And, um, and this maybe is a good time to also bring in, like when we're looking at probiotic supplements, because a lot of people are being encouraged to take probiotic supplements. But really, when you're thinking of your gut with just how expansive it is, it's a bit of a drop in the bucket to take a pill with a couple different strains in it, right? But that being said, I use it very strategically with certain clients if we need it. But for most people on a day-to-day basis, they would benefit more from eating fermented foods and getting a variety of different types of fiber. That research paper that came out just a few years ago where they found the most diversity came from eating at least 30 different types of plant fibers a week.
Yeah, I think it's important to touch on too, with probiotics as well, because those have gotten their time in the spotlight somewhat recently too. Is there are specific strains and there's specific types of bacteriums that can be beneficial for certain conditions. So there is a little bit of guidance that's required there as well, because you can go to the pharmacy spot in any of the grocery stores and see 50, maybe hundreds of different types of probiotics on the shelves. But where you might get the most benefit, if there is going to be a benefit, because again, sometimes these probiotics they might not make it necessarily to the spot that they need to, and there's lots of considerations going on there. Um, but there are specific probiotics for specific conditions and the kind of effect that you want from it. So that's another thing to consider with those.
What about synbiotics? Those seem to be getting a little more popular as well.
Yeah, so when you think about like the gut microbiome, there's prebiotics, and that's what feeds the bacterium in the gut. And then there's probiotics, which is actually the bacterium in the gut. And then a symbiotic is a combination of both, right? So it's just putting both in a capsule. And the tricky part with that, though, is when you're putting in a symbiotic, again, it's kind of when we talked about those like the net zero carbohydrate foods or the lower carbohydrate foods. It's just going to be one type of fiber typically that they're adding into the supplement. So really for most people, it's just a money grab. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. I'm like, it's just a money grab. If you're eating a wide variety of plant-based foods or foods that contain plant fibers, and like resistant starches and those kind of things, you're going to have a wide variety of prebiotics to feed the bacterium in the gut. And that's ultimately, like, when we look at gut health, really what we've been able to identify is diversity is key, right? And so I love what Laura brought up too, of like, there is some better understanding about specific strains for specific things, and we do want to make sure we utilize that, but we also want to make sure that we're capitalizing on diversity, right? And so I remember there was one gastroenterologist that I was talking to, and he recommended that if people found a value with like taking a probiotic supplement, that they should actually be changing it up regularly, right? Just so that we get that variety. Or the way that I kind of explain it with my clients, if we are using, a probiotic, some of my clients do benefit from taking it every day. They just do. Their symptoms are so much better. Their bowel movements are more manageable. And so those individuals will take it, and we might try out a couple different brands and we're rotating, or we would make sure that we're doing a combination of like a probiotic supplement and then foods that have probiotics in them, like a kefir. If they want to do it with milk, they also have dairy-free kefirs now from coconut milk, which is great, or yogurt, tofu, kimchi, any fermented foods.
On the topic of, yeah, the variety of the prebiotic that you kind of want to get in your overall diet, um, that's what I think we're not quite there yet in terms of symbiotics as a supplement, right? Because the technical or scientific definition, I'm not going to quote it exactly because I don't remember it, but the idea behind it is that that combination of that strain of probiotic with that specific prebiotic has a specific benefit on the host, like the human taking it, right? And so it's not necessarily that as long as you have a probiotic and a prebiotic combined, that's a symbiotic. No, they have to impart a specific benefit specifically together. So that is a very specific thing that we can't just kind of like throw things together and call it a day. So that is interesting part of that aspect too.
Is there anything either of you would like to touch on before we finish up?
I I think it's always important for people to understand that, like, you are unique, your life is unique, and how food responds in your body is unique. So if anything ever feels uncomfortable, or you're getting this little inkling of like, maybe I need to investigate this, um, you know, beyond the red flags of like blood in your stool, altered bowel movements, like low iron levels, having bowel movements at night when you should be sleeping, you know, beyond that, I think it's, or even with that, I think it's always worthwhile to have a conversation with a dietitian. We do the 15-minute discovery calls, and that's where we can, have a conversation of, okay, what are the issues that you're concerned about and what might be a good path moving forward, right? It's always a very collaborative approach. It's a discussion, and it's really about trying to figure out what the best path moving forward is for you and your lifestyle. So if you're curious about it, I always say start with the 15-minute phone call, because, or like, Laura's great at them. She's always open and honest of, where she can help support you, myself as well. Because at the end of the day, it's about, walking this journey together and not feeling like you're in it alone anymore.
Yeah, it can be a very empowering thing to kind of recognize that in yourself that something isn't quite right. It's a bumpy road to sometimes have that addressed, right? So, um, yeah, I've heard lots of unfortunate stories, but that's like what Kelsey said. What we're here for as dietitians, you can have a chat with us at any time through that 15-minute call. Um, just to get some guidance as to what the next steps are. We're always welcoming you with open arms and figuring out, okay, what maybe do we need to focus on? Are there any red flags going on? And also just validating your symptoms, because that can go very unvalidated, unfortunately, sometimes um, in other areas that you might visit. So just, yeah, acknowledging that you know your body best, If something's not feeling right, then there's always things that we can work on in nutrition and lifestyle to help you out there. And so, yeah, we're always there for you for that.
And if with what you're struggling with, maybe nutrition we determine maybe isn't the right fit at that time, we can provide guidance in terms of next steps with other healthcare providers or ways to discuss some of these concerns with your doctor as well. So, thank you both very much for joining me today, uh, especially Kelsey. Thank you again for joining us for the second time. It's always great to have you on, and we hope that you'll be able to join again for something in this area in the future.